A storm rages at 30,000 feet. Lightning flashes through a shattered cockpit, and a disgraced pilot faces a choice that could save or doom hundreds of lives. In that moment, the weight of the past clashes with the demands of the present. Will she rise above her darkest hour, or will the sky claim her legacy? Tonight, we unravel a secret that's haunted a hero, as loyalty and survival collide thousands of feet above ground. Old wounds reopen, and destiny knocks with thunderous force. When honor is all that remains, how far would you go to reclaim your place among legends? Before we dive into this breathtaking journey of sacrifice and second chances, tell us, where in the world are you joining from? And what draws you to stories of military courage or the thrill of flight? Are you ready for takeoff? Let's begin Patriot's flight. The airport was alive with movement, a blur of rolling suitcases, rain-streaked windows, and voices echoing across polished floors. The evening sky outside was bruised purple from the retreating storm. Within the terminal, men and women in pressed uniforms moved briskly, their medals glinting in the pale light as they returned home for Memorial Day remembrances. Among them walked Rebecca Hunter, head down beneath the grey hood of her worn Air Force Academy sweatshirt, a silent ghost drifting through a world she once called her own. Rebecca's stride was purposeful, but her eyes betrayed her wariness. She avoided glancing at the recruitment posters near the gate, their promises of duty and honor stinging more fiercely tonight than ever. Every crackle of the PA system made her jaw clench, as if the world itself might call her out and expose the disgrace she tried so hard to contain. Her fingers, strong and calloused, clutched the strap of an old canvas bag, her only travel companion in years of running from her past. At Gate B12, families gathered, their laughter filling the air, and a troop of Navy personnel waited to board. Rebecca shrank deeper into herself as she watched a little girl in dress blues hug her father goodbye, her farewell salute honest and trembling. Something twisted in Rebecca's chest, and she forced herself to look away. She scanned her fellow travelers, business professionals distracted by laptops, a group of college students on a final trip before summer, an older man with a clipped mustache who reminded her painfully of the commander who'd once mentored her. Over the loudspeaker, the boarding announcement for Flight 247 hissed through the static. Rebecca waited until the eager and the important had filed through, then handed her ticket to the smiling attendant with the almost automatic reflexes of someone who had spent years following orders. She gave a curt nod and disappeared down the jet bridge, the future feeling as uncertain as the weather outside. As she entered the cabin, the scent of brewed coffee, lingering cologne, and jet fuel mingled with the quiet buzz of conversation. She spotted Major Owen Walker, his upright posture unmistakable even in civilian clothes, as he read a worn paperback in row 11. Nearby, Maria Sanchez, the petite flight attendant, laughed gently as she calmed a nervous passenger. Maria's voice, soft yet full of resolve, caught Rebecca's attention, a reminder that courage often wears 1,000 faces. Rebecca slid into her window seat near the wing, the engine's massive shape casting a silver shadow across the tarmac. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the hum soothe her nerves as she rehearsed her practiced breathing. Flashes of memory, the tribunal, the cold gavel, her uniform stripped away, battled for space in her mind. Rebecca pressed her palm over the faded tattoo on her arm, the wings barely visible, and drew in a steadier breath. A commotion began up front. Captain Josh Bell, his voice warm and measured, welcomed everyone aboard. He spoke of clear skies ahead, apologizing for the slight delay due to the earlier storm. The words were practiced but earnest, and Rebecca felt a rush of nostalgia, the cadence of a true airman. As the cabin settled, First Officer Aaron Kim made his way down the aisle, exchanging brief, reassuring glances with the crew. Rebecca watched the safety demonstration with studied indifference, her fingers tracing invisible formation patterns on the tray table. All the while her heart pounded, not from fear of flying, but from the dread of being noticed, of being recognized for what she once was, and for everything she could never be again. She shrank deeper into her seat as the aircraft began to taxi. The lights dimmed as Flight 247 took its place at the runway threshold. The engines powered up, vibrations running through the fuselage like a distant drum. Rebecca looked out at the slick black tarmac, the world receding as the jet gathered speed, breaking through the storm's remnants and lifting into the uncertain night. As the city lights gave way to cloud and darkness, Rebecca's story, long buried in silence, was about to be thrust back into the glaring spotlight, at 30,000 feet, where heroism and redemption would have to battle the ghosts she carried aboard. The first hour of flight drifted by peacefully, turbulence little more than a gentle rocking that lulled some passengers to sleep and sent others reaching for headphones or novels. Rebecca sat rigid, gazing at the drifting clouds through her window, their edges tinged with moonlight. The world felt impossibly distant, like a place she'd visited in another life. In the galley, Maria Sanchez poured coffee for a couple in economy, answering questions with calm precision. "We're expecting a smooth ride," she said, letting her practiced smile flicker. Overhead, Captain Josh Bell's voice piped through the intercom, promising a slight tailwind and arrival ahead of schedule. There was comfort in his tone, a man who belonged in the sky. A sharp vibration ran through the steel bones of Flight 247, and Rebecca's fingers unconsciously tightened on her tray table. She noticed First Officer Aaron Kim slip into the aisle toward the cockpit, his clipboard tucked under his arm, expression tense but composed. A moment later, a chime echoed through the cabin. Rebecca looked up. The seatbelt sign flickered on. Outside her window, distant clouds loomed. A warning perhaps, or simply the night's uncertainty pressing in. Murmurs rose as passengers fastened seatbelts, some shifting anxiously in their seats. In the cockpit, Captain Bell reached for his water, his hand trembling slightly, unseen by all but Aaron. "You all right, sir?" Aaron asked in a whisper. "I'll be fine. Just need a moment," Josh replied, breathing deep, forcing composure. But as another jolt of turbulence rattled the aircraft, his face tightened in pain he couldn't hide. Aaron's eyes widened as Captain Bell's hand clutched his chest, eyes unfocused, his breath ragged. Josh's voice cracked through the intercom, mid-sentence then gone. Static hummed. The plane held its course, but there was a new heaviness, a collective hush of unease. The crew exchanged wary glances. Maria appeared at the cockpit door, lips pressed tight, concern etched deep. Inside the cockpit, chaos unfolded. Josh's vision blurred, breath scraping from his lungs. Aaron reached for the controls, voice rising. "Captain, Josh!" The older man slumped sideways, his body pressing dead weight against the throttle. Aaron struggled to free him, heart hammering, adrenaline roaring. The plane lurched as he managed to right the controls, sweat beading. Maria, drawn by the alarms blaring inside, burst into the cockpit. Her training called for composure, but her eyes flashed panic. "We need help, now!" she hissed, struggling to keep her voice from carrying. In the cabin, the uneasy energy became panic. A passenger in business class, a former EMT, hurried forward to assist, but it was clear from Maria's trembling hands and Aaron's frantic calls to ground control that they were in dire territory. Rebecca stiffened. She could read fear in Maria's posture from across the aisle, could hear the unsteady rhythm in Aaron's voice as it came, muffled, through the crack beneath the cockpit door. Passengers began to whisper, then shout questions. A baby started to cry. Someone stood abruptly, demanding to know what was happening. Major Owen's commanding voice tried to settle the crowd, but tension tinged every word. Maria emerged, scanning the rows, desperation in her eyes. "Is there anyone here with flight experience?" she called, her voice quivering for the first time all evening. Silence stretched, eyes darted. Rebecca's heart pounded. It would be so easy to keep her head down, to let someone else answer, to remain just a shadow in the crowd. But Maria found her. Their eyes met. Maria's gaze pleaded for honesty, for help, for something more than helpless bystanding. Rebecca hesitated, the shame of her past surging up, choking. But as Aaron's voice trembled over the intercom, "If someone can help in the cockpit, please, I need you now." Rebecca's instincts overcame her fear. Slowly she stood, her throat tight, every step toward the front of the plane heavy with the weight of memory and the judgment she still feared. Whispers followed her. Some passengers recoiled. Others watched, uncertain and desperate. Major Owen met her eyes and nodded ever so slightly, a silent gesture of respect old soldiers share. Maria reached out, squeezing Rebecca's arm as she approached. "We don't have much time," she whispered. Rebecca took a breath, steeling herself. Just beyond the narrow door, chaos waited. The cockpit transformed from sanctuary to crucible. The moment she crossed that threshold, there would be no turning back. As the cockpit door thunked shut behind her, Rebecca's senses sharpened. The suffocating scent of adrenaline, sweat, and burned circuitry filled the tight space. Captain Bell's body, sprawled and slack, had been shifted just enough to afford Aaron a bit of breathing room, but not nearly enough to dispel the fear hanging in the air. Aaron Kim's face was drawn taut, lips pale, eyes brimming with dread. "He just collapsed," he whispered, words trembling. "None of the checklists are enough. I'm not ready for this alone." Rebecca's gaze swept the dashboard, a confusing mess of flashing warning lights, coiling wires, and a storm closing in fast on the radar. Systems status compromised. Fuel stable for now. But the autopilot's control panel blinked with silent accusation. She moved with ingrained confidence, but every motion was shadowed by self-doubt. Her hands still remembered the tactile rhythm of military aircraft, but this was no fighter jet. "We'll work together," she replied, voice steadier than she felt. "First, let's get him out." Together, they managed to move Captain Bell to the galley, where Maria and the EMT gently attempted first aid under flickering lights. Maria glanced at Rebecca, a look pleading for strength no one else could muster. Rebecca returned to the left seat. Aaron fumbled through the emergency checklist, hands jittering. "Mayday's out," he said breathlessly into the radio. Ground control answered, their words crackling and pitching with concern. "Roger, 247. Maintain current heading. Who's flying?" Aaron hesitated, glancing to Rebecca. Her heart thudded. All at once, her past snapped forward. The tribunal room, rows of sullen faces, the verdict that had cost her everything. But this cockpit was silent except for Aaron's frantic breathing and the relentless drone of the storm beyond the windshield. "Rebecca Hunter," she said quietly into the radio. "Former Air Force. I'm taking the controls." A beat of static. The operator's voice returned, wary but hopeful. "Understood, Hunter. We'll walk you through as needed. Storm fronts intensifying. Prepare for rough air." She glanced sideways. Aaron was biting his lip so hard he nearly drew blood. Rebecca scanned the sky ahead. Shimmering lightning forked across the clouds. The dashboard glowed an alert orange. Autopilot disengaged. Manual only. She wrapped her hands around the yoke, feeling the ghost of her old training surge up through her body. There was safety in the action, if not in the outcome. Behind the cockpit door, the tension was mounting. Passengers murmured in confusion, a few voices rising in anxious query. "What's going on up there?" Maria cracked the door, relaying wordless updates with her eyes. Rebecca saw terror and trust war in Maria's face. Aaron hesitated. Do you really want to do this?" Rebecca's voice was softer but unwavering. "No one else can. You're not alone, Aaron. Not while I'm here." The first gust hit, violent, shaking the entire fuselage. Instruments wobbled. Rebecca countered, steadying with small, confident corrections, her military discipline overriding the screaming doubt at the edges of her mind. The radio burst with background noise. News of the crisis had begun to circulate. Victoria Price's voice, sharp and urgent, relayed updates across national news. A former military pilot with a controversial past is now at the controls. Will she save the day, or is the disaster just beginning? Rebecca flinched, hearing her name twisted into a question mark on the world stage. She grit her teeth, staring down the storm. The plane rattled violently. Aaron barked checklists, sweating through every word. Landing gear test, confirmed. Flaps, responsive. Rebecca's reflexes took over. We'll need to descend out of this cloud layer before we lose all visibility. Maria, prepare the cabin. Maria's voice echoed through the cabin, clear but shaken. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated and calm. Her authority won her a second of order, but uncertainty still ran wild through the aisles. The storm's edge flashed ahead, thunder rolling like distant artillery. Rebecca gripped the yoke tighter, tuning everything out but the machine, the storm, and the faltering voice of Aaron beside her. The ghosts of her fall from grace pressed in, but above the clouds, alone with duty and fate, she felt the faint, reluctant spark of her old self return. As Flight 247 plunged toward the violent center of the storm, there was no turning back. Rebecca led forward on instinct, her mind poised between the darkness below and the desperate hope that somewhere, if she could just hold on, the light would break through. Rain hammered the windows like 1,000 drumming fingers, slanting sideways, as the jet punched into the churning underbelly of the storm. Lightning flickered outside, a jagged strobe that illuminated the clouds in stark, ghostly flashes. Rebecca's grip tightened on the yoke, her knuckles white with strain. Beside her, Aaron stifled a gasp as the aircraft shuddered, dropping sharply before leveling with a groan. Inside the cabin, Maria steadied herself, moving from row to row with measured calm. Passengers clung to armrests and each other, their faces pale in the emergency lighting. Overlapping cries and whispered prayers filled the charged air. Major Owen, his military bearing unshaken, took it upon himself to help soothe those nearby, speaking in calm tones and casting reassuring glances toward the cockpit. Rebecca scanned the flight deck, checking dials and gauges. Several warning lights glared from the console, a hydraulic pressure alert, a sensor malfunction, and an ominous autopilot fail indicator pulsing a threat. A cold bead of sweat traced the line of her jaw, but she responded as if performing a drill, her hands moving with remembered authority. "Aaron, get the alternate navigation online," she ordered, voice firm despite the tremor in her chest. He complied, fighting the urge to look over his shoulder at the chaos erupting behind them. The storm outside intensified. Each descent brought a cacophony of rain and the eerie howl of wind, the radar screen filled with patches of angry red and amber. Rebecca guided the plane lower, searching for a stable altitude beneath the heaviest turbulence. Her mind whirred through possibilities: fuel reserves, nearest diversion airports, all the procedures drilled into muscle memory, but never tested quite like this. Suddenly the aircraft lurched, a sickening jolt that sent loose items tumbling. Aaron yelped as a panel flickered, plunging them into partial darkness. Rebecca kept her composure, flicking a backup switch and rerouting circuitry with steady hands. In that breath she felt the burden of every choice she'd ever made, good and bad, before refocusing with loyalty to the souls now depending on her. Maria's voice came crackling over the intercom. "Everyone, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Trust the crew. We're in good hands." Rebecca's chest tightened with the responsibility that voice placed on her. She could imagine the faces out in the cabin, terrified, skeptical, clinging to hope. Aaron glanced at her. "Systems are holding for now, but we're going to need to reroute. That storm cell is huge." Rebecca nodded, eyeing the chart. "Nearest safe approach is Jefferson Airfield, 40 miles north. Get coordinates set for ATC." Lightning smashed the sky just ahead, sending the plane reeling again. Rebecca steadied, jaw clenched. The old feeling rushed in, a reckless defiance of nature, the singular trust between pilot and aircraft. But now lives hung on each decision. There was no margin for error. On the ground, the world watched. Newsrooms buzzed, and social media feeds surged with speculation. Victoria Price broke a tense news update. "This is a developing situation. The pilot at the controls, once accused of insubordination, now faces nature's fury and the nightmares of her own past. Can she do what's never been done before?" In the cabin, rumors rippled. Some passengers questioned why they hadn't turned back. Others pleaded for updates. Major Owen raised his voice, explaining simply, "We're in the best possible hands now. Trust her. She flew combat." "This is just another kind of battlefield." Rebecca tuned out the noise, shutting out doubt. She tuned into the machine, the patterns of pressure and sound. Wind roared, rain battered. Still, she pressed forward. Each second stretched, time slowing, a relentless test of nerve. Aaron called out, "Approach vector locked. Jefferson is prepping for emergency. We're cleared for priority landing." Rebecca exhaled, adrenaline burning in her veins. "Let's bring them home, Aaron." Outside, the storm raged with all its might, but inside, Rebecca channeled every lesson earned in fire and loss. She was no longer running from herself. She was flying headlong through the storm, determined to deliver every soul aboard Flight 247 safely back to solid ground. The constant vibration of the storm faded to a tense lull as Flight 247 carved a shaky corridor through clearing skies. Patches of moonlight blinked through swollen, retreating clouds. The worst of the chaos was behind them. But inside the cabin, fear simmered, waiting for the next disaster, for confirmation that the nightmare was over. Rebecca opened the cockpit door for a moment, seeking any sign of calm among the passengers. She saw worry etched sharply on every face. Maria hurried up the aisle, whispering reassurance, but some passengers eyed Rebecca with open suspicion. A businessman in first class stood abruptly. "She's not even part of the crew. What's going on here? Who's flying this plane?" His accusation snapped through the pressurized air. Maria placed herself between the protester and the cockpit, her back straight, despite her trembling hands. She's the only pilot with combat wings on this aircraft. She's saving our lives right now. But the seeds of doubt had taken root. A rising murmur swept the rows, passengers questioning, demanding answers. Rebecca found herself fighting on two fronts: the battered aircraft battling the aftermath of the storm, and the simmering distrust of the people she was risking everything to protect. Aaron's voice was quiet beside her. "You don't have to do this. Let me talk to them." She shook her head, jaw set. "If they don't believe I can bring them down, nothing you say will matter. I have to earn that trust." She stepped out into the aisle, face to face with a wall of skepticism and fear. Major Owen rose at the same moment, offering silent backup. Rebecca met the businessman's glare head-on. "My name is Rebecca Hunter, former Captain United States Air Force. Yes, I was grounded. Yes, I lost everything. I made mistakes. I paid for them. But right now there's no one in this cabin better equipped to land us safely. I need you to let me do my job." A hush fell, a somber, loaded pause. For a moment, the only sound was the engine's steady whine and the occasional cough or muffled sob. The businessman faltered, eyes darting between Rebecca and the panic around him. Major Owen spoke, voice steely. "Captain Hunter flew 3 tours over Afghanistan. She brought her aircraft home under fire more than once. This storm doesn't even measure." The words, heavy with service and sacrifice, carried weight. Rebecca could see concern giving way to reluctant trust in the faces before her. Suddenly an alert blared from the cockpit. Another electrical fault, the kind that could jeopardize landing protocols. The moment shattered. Rebecca rushed back inside, heart slamming. Aaron ran through diagnostics, his hands steady but pale. "Backup system's gone. We'll have to run the approach manually." Rebecca nodded, mind racing. Maria slipped into the cockpit, eyes wide. "Do you want me to update the passengers?" Rebecca met her gaze. "Tell them we're in for a rough final approach, but we're coming home, I gave my word." As Maria relayed the message, Rebecca and Aaron watched the lights of Jefferson Airfield flicker on the horizon. It was so close now, almost within reach, but she could feel the collective trust of everyone aboard resting on her shoulders, fragile as spun glass. One wrong move, and everything would unravel. "Checklist," Aaron said, voice low and urgent. Rebecca nodded, her own voice quiet. "Landing gear check flaps, set for full, descent steady 3 degrees. The intercom crackled as Maria returned. "They're scared, but they believe in you. I think we all do." Her voice trembled. Rebecca looked up, offering the faintest smile, grim but real. The approach began. The runway lights glimmered through the dark, beckoning. Rebecca's hands moved with cautious precision. The plane dipped lower, shuddering as it passed the last patches of turbulence, the runway painting a ribbon of hope below. The final moments on descent held the world hostage, every breath on board synchronizing, waiting. Rebecca's focus tunneled, the sound of wheels lowering, the creak of the cabin, the squeeze of Aaron's hands on the controls. Even the storm outside seemed to still, nature itself holding its breath. This landing would be her reckoning or her redemption. Rebecca's eyes were locked on the illuminated strip of Jefferson Airfield, its runway lights shimmering like a lifeline amid the darkness. The battered jet vibrated beneath her hands, every straining bolt, every flicker on the dashboard underscoring how little margin for error remained. "Aaron, confirm speed and altitude," she ordered, her voice a hush of steel. "Speed 140 knots, descent steady." "Flaps set," Aaron replied, his voice steadier now, masking the nerves rattling through his body. Over the radio, air traffic control's voice broke through. "Flight 247, you are cleared for emergency landing. Fire and rescue are standing by." Rebecca pressed the transmit button with a resolve that surprised even her. "Roger, Jefferson, we are on final approach, requesting immediate assistance on touchdown." The cockpit mirrored the tension outside, the shrill beeping of a systems warning, Aaron's anxious glances, and a peal of thunder that echoed through the hull. The chaos of earlier, storm, doubt, accusation, had distilled into this moment, a single, relentless focus on bringing Flight 247 safely home. Through the cockpit door, the cabin was a study in suspended animation. No one spoke above a whisper. Maria moved swiftly among the rows, checking belts, squeezing frozen hands, her own fear masked by the assurance in her voice. Major Owen knelt near the galley, calming a panicked mother and her child, his authority quiet but unyielding. Rebecca's hands moved the yoke with a precision honed through years of training and tempered by disgrace. For the first time since that fateful tribunal, she felt the full purpose of her calling, the solemn honor of carrying lives, all futures entwined with her own trembling hope. "Landing gear down," she announced, voice steady. The undercarriage rumbled in reply, and for a terrible second a warning light blinked, threatening failure. Aaron held his breath. Rebecca nudged the throttle, coaxing the mechanism through its hesitation, and with a final shudder, the gear locked into place. The light turned green. "Gear down and locked," Aaron confirmed, relief fluttering in his chest. Rebecca eyed the runway ahead. Rain slicked the tarmac, glowing in the flash of rescue lights. Wind gusted sideways. One final test, a crosswind that could push them off course. Heart thundering, Rebecca adjusted their heading, recalling each muscle memory from countless combat landings. "Brace for impact," she called, her voice carrying to the last row. Aaron called out altitude, 1,000 feet, 500 feet, 200. Rebecca tuned out everything but the alignment of plane and runway, the hiss of rain, the sheer willpower that radiated from every silent plea behind her. At 50 feet, turbulence struck again, the aircraft dipping dangerously to the left. Rebecca fought the controls, righting the plane with calm, decisive strength. In the galley, Maria gripped a seat, whispering a prayer. The passengers squeezed eyes shut, some in hope, some in terror. "Steady," Rebecca breathed. "Now!" The wheels hit the runway with a pounding jolt. Tires screeched over the wet pavement as Rebecca deployed the reverse thrusters and braked hard, holding the line with every ounce of strength. The aircraft shimmied, slewed until it found traction, and finally, in a roar of engine and rain, slowed to a halt at the far end of the strip. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. No movement, no sound except the staccato of rain on the hull. Then the cabin erupted in cries of relief, sobs and cheers overlapping as the reality of survival set in. Maria's voice broke over the intercom. "We have landed. Remain seated until emergency crews arrive." Her tone shook with emotion. Rebecca let herself sag back in the seat, adrenaline and exhaustion washing through her. Aaron pressed trembling fingers to his eyes, a choked laugh escaping him. Outside, fire trucks and ambulances surrounded the plane. Light strobed through the cockpit, illuminating Rebecca's tired, astonished face. Her hands, once doubted, once disgraced, had delivered every soul on Flight 247 safely back to Earth. She sat for a long moment, the past and present finally merging. For the first time in years, Rebecca Hunter was not running from her name. She was reclaiming it. Floodlights cast harsh halos around the jet as the doors hissed open, letting in a torrent of sirens and storm-dampened air. First responders poured aboard, voices brisk and gentle, checking each passenger for injury. The scent of rain, jet fuel, and relief filled every seat. Rebecca rose from her seat, hands shaking as adrenaline ebbed, replaced by a bone-deep fatigue. She watched Aaron guide firefighters to Captain Bell, still unconscious but breathing, the medical team swiftly tending to him. Maria, eyes red-rimmed but proud, wrapped her arms around Rebecca for a brief, desperate moment. In the cabin, passengers filed out, some limping, some helping others. Many paused before exiting, turning to Rebecca. The businessman from first class, earlier a vocal doubter, lingered, words caught in his throat. "Thank you," he finally managed. I was wrong." He shook her hand with trembling fingers before joining the others in the rain-lit night. Journalists were already gathering beyond the perimeter fence, cameras trained on the battered aircraft that had become the midnight stage for a nation's drama. Victoria Price's voice, now softer, threaded through every news feed. Tonight a pilot once forced from flying has reclaimed her honor, and perhaps her future. Rebecca stood just outside the jet, rain soft against her face, scanning the crowd for familiar faces. Someone pressed a dry blanket around her shoulders, but she barely felt it. Every moment played on a loop in her mind. Each decision, each plea for trust, all the faces she'd carried through the storm. Airport officials approached with hushed words and awed glances. There was talk of interviews, investigations, commendations. Rebecca nodded, barely hearing. In her heart, it wasn't the headlines or the praise she craved. It was what Maria whispered as the ambulances pulled away. "You saved them, all of us. You saved yourself too. Major Owen found Rebecca near the ambulance bay, rain running in rivulets off his strong shoulders. Your father would be proud, he said quietly. More than proud, he'd understand. He knew what it meant to carry the weight. Rebecca swallowed hard, emotion knotting in her chest. I wasn't sure anyone could forgive me, least of all myself. But maybe it's not about erasing the past. Maybe it's about what you do when you get another chance. As dawn's first light crept over the horizon, the storm breaking at last, a new chapter beckoned. The passengers and crew, once strangers, were bound now by shared survival, by a trust fragile but real. Rescue teams finished their rounds. The new cycle was poised to turn this night's ordeal into legend. Rebecca allowed herself a moment alone at the edge of the tarmac, watching the sun rise over the battered plane. She breathed in the future, uncertain but possible, heavy with responsibility, and finally filled with hope. Maria joined her, standing shoulder to shoulder. "Are you going to fight to be reinstated?" she asked. Rebecca turned, eyes clear for the first time in years. "Maybe. Or maybe I'll find a way to serve. That doesn't mean flying alone." Maria smiled through tears. "Whatever you do, I'll be there. A lot of us will." Rebecca wrapped her arms around Maria, grounding herself in the rare solace of understanding. Around them, the airport slowly began to move beyond emergency. Passengers reuniting, children laughing, rescue crews stowing equipment, the world beginning again. But for Rebecca, this was not an ending, nor merely a redemption. It was the first page in a life, rewritten with courage, honor, and the earned forgiveness that comes only after the darkest night. Morning sunlight flooded the shattered silence of the night before, splashing gold across the tarmac and transforming Jefferson Airfield into a stage for redemption. The battered jet stood as a testament to survival, a silhouette against the dawn, its scars catching the light. Rebecca's breath came slow, measured. She sat alone in a debriefing room, a steaming cup of untouched coffee cooling at her elbow. Her flight uniform was wrinkled, emergency vest slung over the back of her chair, hair still damp from the storm. Her hands trembled just slightly, fingers absently tracing the rim of the empty mug. Two investigators entered, their badges glinting, voices low but direct. "Captain Hunter, we need a complete statement. Everything from your decision to take the controls to the moment you landed." Rebecca nodded, meeting their eyes steadily. Memories surged. The chaos in the cockpit, Maria's faith, Aaron's trust, the way terror and purpose had braided together when the storm closed in. She spoke with measured candor, her voice gathering strength with each word. She explained the choices, each risk, each calculation, the refusal to give up when the odds narrowed. The lead investigator, a woman with grey at her temples and a quiet sense of authority, listened closely. "People will say you broke the rules again," she said softly. "But you also shattered every expectation." Rebecca drew in a steadying breath, realizing that once she might have shrunk from this reckoning. Now she spoke with humility, born of hardship. "I did what I was trained to do. I made mistakes in the past, but I learned. And last night, every lesson, every scar, it mattered. It saved lives." The second investigator nodded, voice gentle. "You know there will be a formal hearing. Some will protest you even being in the cockpit." Rebecca looked away, the pain a fresh cut. "I know, but whatever comes, I'll answer for it. I have to." Noon bled into afternoon. News crews pressed in, their questions sharp-edged and relentless. Maria shielded Rebecca from the most aggressive, her presence unwavering. "She did what only a true pilot could," Maria declared to one camera, her own eyes shining with fierce loyalty. "Judge her by that." Aaron lingered nearby, exhaustion on his face but pride in his voice. "None of us get through alone," he told a reporter. "She gave us a reason to hold on, even when all hope seemed gone." A military transport arrived, carrying Major Owen's superiors and a representative from the Department of Homeland Security. The air thickened with formality, words like precedent and protocol floating through the hangar. But amid the briefings and protocol, one moment stood apart. Major Owen pulled Rebecca aside as dusk returned, handing her a crisp envelope. Inside was a letter, her father's last words, delayed in delivery until this day. "To my daughter, you were always meant to lead." Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes as she read the words. The past, the shame, the exile from her calling, softened in the warmth of forgiveness and love, both earned and unconditional. That night, the crew and passengers gathered quietly in the terminal, bound together by memories of terror and relief. Children who had clung to their parents the night before now chased each other between the seats, laughter flaring bright. The businessman approached Rebecca once more, this time with his whole family, offering thanks and an outstretched hand, an apology in his solemn gaze. As the airport lights flickered on again, Rebecca walked out onto the empty runway. She turned to watch the city wake, feeling the fresh promise of belonging settle gently in her chest. A new day, a new chance. The light revealed everything, the pain, the triumph, the unbreakable resolve that now guided her forward. Whatever judgment awaited her tomorrow, Rebecca Hunter was ready, no longer defined by exile or shame, but by the day she chose to return and to lead. A week had passed since the night Flight 247 pierced through storm and fear to find safe harbor on Jefferson's sacred runway. In that time, the world seemed to pause, the weight of Rebecca Hunter's actions rippling far beyond the airport gates. News of her resolve, her courage under fire, had kindled nationwide debate about second chances, about sacrifice, about what it truly means to serve. The formal inquiry unfolded in Washington, D.C., in a marble-walled chamber where military banners hung like silent witnesses. Rebecca stood straight in her dress uniform, medals and insignia carefully polished. Maria and Aaron waited in a quiet corner, proud and anxious. Major Owen, in full dress, offered a reassuring nod as she entered the room. "Captain Hunter, you stand before this board with your past mistakes and your present valor," the lead officer began, his voice echoing through the hall. "In the early hours of April 4th, you made the decision to assume command of Flight 247, despite having been grounded." Rebecca's instincts screamed with nerves, yet as she faced the tribunal, she remembered every moment in the cockpit, the darkness, the battered controls, the terrified faces. She chose honesty, her words carrying the steady weight of responsibility. "I broke the rules to save lives. I ask for nothing more than justice, for my crew, for myself, and for everyone on that plane." Questions pressed in from every side. There were doubts, accusations, voices reminding her of the tribunal years before, the humiliation that had exiled her from flight. But this time, another voice rose. Major Owen spoke. "There are moments when protocol must serve purpose." Rebecca Hunter made the ultimate choice. Service above self, nation above reputation. Testimonies from survivors followed. The businessman described the moment trust was restored in a stranger's hands. Maria told of leadership under crushing odds. Aaron, voice tight, recounted Rebecca's call to brace for landing, a phrase that became, in the crew's memory, the bridge between despair and hope. After hours of tense deliberation, the board returned. The lead officer's eyes met Rebecca's, somber but not unkind. "We have reviewed every detail. The verdict is unanimous. You acted with exceptional judgment and valor. You are hereby reinstated with honors." Relief and disbelief crashed through Rebecca. As the room erupted in applause, she turned to her friends, Maria, Aaron, Major Owen, all embraced by the tide of joyous vindication. Tears slipped down Rebecca's cheeks, silent testimony to years of regret now transformed by hard-won redemption. Yet the true reward came not in medals, but in the faces gathered later on the sunlit steps of the memorial outside. There the survivors came together. Children she'd helped calm, the mother she'd guided through panic, strangers bound by a night of terror and trust, now united in gratitude. Owen placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did more than land that plane, Rebecca. You brought yourself home." That evening, as the city's lights shimmered over the Potomac, Rebecca stood in silent reflection. Her scarred hands gripped the familiar fabric of her uniform, no longer a symbol of judgment, but one of belonging. Her father's words, read 100 times now, echoed in her mind. "You were always meant to lead." In the end, honor was not just restored in the eyes of her nation, but in her own reclaimed heart. The sky over Arlington was clear and deep blue, the hum of jets in the distance like a steady heartbeat. 7 years had passed since the night when Flight 247's emergency landing had not just saved lives, but rewritten the course of so many. Rebecca Hunter stood in dress uniform among a small circle at a dedication ceremony for a new aviation safety institute named in her honor, the Hunter Center for Leadership and Air Safety. Her hair now streaked with silver at the temples, She wore her years with a quiet strength, her presence as grounded as the earth beneath her feet. Maria, vibrant as ever, was there, now a chief instructor for flight attendants, her laughter as warm as Rebecca remembered. They hugged before the speeches, sharing a moment of wordless gratitude. Maria's young daughter, who tugged at her hand, had inherited her mother's resilience. Aaron had climbed the ranks as well. He was now a captain and mentor, known for his steady nerves and patient wisdom. He greeted Rebecca with the esteem of an old comrade in arms. "You taught me that real courage isn't about having no fear," he said quietly, "but about carrying others through it." Major Owen had retired from active duty, but his legacy endured in the new pilots he trained. Each one taught that leadership was measured less by protocol and more by valor in the face of uncertainty. On this morning, he wore civilian clothes, but the pride in his posture was unmistakable. The dedication ceremony drew not just dignitaries, but some of the passengers whose lives had changed that night. The businessman's daughter, once a terrified child, now attended the Air Force Academy, waving shyly at Rebecca. Families gathered in the sunlight, sharing stories not of terror but of renewal. Rebecca's heart was full of memory and meaning. The ache of her exile had softened into something bittersweet. Every sacrifice, every doubt, seemed necessary to bring her, and so many others, to this place of belonging. She had spoken at conferences, written about resilience, and quietly funded scholarships for pilots who'd once lost their wings, just as she had. As the American flag rippled in the soft breeze, Rebecca took to the podium. She looked out at old friends and new faces, her voice steady and clear. "We are more than the worst thing that ever happened to us. We are what we choose to become after. May this place be a home for second chances, for every leader, every crew, every soul who believes the sky is wide enough for all of us." After the ceremony, as the sun dipped low, Rebecca and Maria walked the old airfield together, laughing. Older now, wiser, but never forgetting that night. The past had never left them, but it no longer defined them. It had forged something unbreakable. And in the hush just before evening, as a plane soared overhead, Rebecca raised her eyes to the vast, limitless blue. She smiled, knowing she would never fly alone again. Thank you for joining us on the journey of Patriot's Flight, a story where courage is tested in the darkest skies and redemption is earned one hard-fought choice at a time. Rebecca's journey reminds us that honor is not simply given, it's lived, sometimes lost, and, if we choose to rise, proudly reclaimed. True leadership is about serving others, finding strength in vulnerability, and believing in second chances, both for ourselves and those we trust with our lives. If this story moved you, I invite you to share where you're watching from and what patriotism means to you in today's world. Comment the word resilience below to show you made it to the very end of Rebecca's Odyssey, and to stand united with everyone who believes in courage, redemption, and hope. Do you have a story, military or otherwise, that left a mark on your life? Have tales of aviation, heroism, or sacrifice shaped your understanding of duty? Feel the call of the skies. Don't miss the other powerful narratives waiting for you right here. Just check the cards for more unforgettable journeys through conflict, heart, and honor. Keep flying high. Keep believing. And remember, sometimes the bravest flight is the one that leads us back home.